I am Ryan O'Dowd, and this is the Black Hand Communique. The current episode of this show is about socialism and its relationship to American politics. I'm going to try to not be dry and intellectual through this whole thing, but it's not going to have the same bombast that I normally present myself with because it's going to be more informative than it is going to be me wistfully but forcefully trying to imprint my opinion upon you so that I get what I want in the world. If that makes sense. It's pretty obvious. Okay, so the word socialism's come up recently in American politics quite a bit due to Bernie Sanders. And no, I'm not trying to name drop the guy at every single episode. It's just, I'm watching the news, it's inspiring me to say things, and he's just in the news. And that word is in the news, socialism. And what motivated me to start this particular episode is that I read an article that quoted Rand Paul, who is, although very right-wing, a government official who I normally have quite a bit of respect for. At least most of the time he rests on his philosophical underpinnings to what he thinks, and most of the time he does what he thinks is right, and especially when it comes to filibustering the security state and trying to act on behalf of civil liberties, including the Second Amendment. I like things like that coming from him, even if I don't like his economics so much. But this guy, who I normally consider to be fair in what he says, or at least presents himself honestly, as far as I can tell, Rand Paul, he's talking about Bernie Sanders and comparing him to Pol Pot, the guy who led the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia in the 70s, executed most of the intellectuals and forced everyone from the cities into the countryside to grow rice to try to start an economy from scratch. And Stalin, who is best known for helping significantly to win the Second World War, but doing so by killing and enslaving his own people, shooting deserters in the back of the head, salting the grounds, destroying his own factories, massacring Russian lives, 20 million of them, actually. I mean, the Nazis killed them, but Stalin's war policy made it a lot worse than it would be. And he's also known as being the man who betrayed the Bolshevik Revolution in Soviet Union by executing all the people who fought the revolution in the first place, which would be sort of like Thomas Jefferson becoming the President of the United States and then executing George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, etc., etc., etc. So Rand Paul compared Bernie Sanders to Stalin and Pol Pot, who are two of the most horrific dictators to take power in the 20th century. And I think this belays on Rand Paul's behalf a certain ignorance that he has, but I actually think it's not just ignorance. I think he is playing politics here, and he's using scare tactics. He says he's actually a little bit scared. Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist, which really means a social democrat, which is a center-left party in Europe. Okay? He wants to expand the federal government to cover more entitlements in terms of healthcare and tuition costs, and help the environment through environmental initiatives. He does not and has never called for the foundation of gulags or the assassination of political figures in the United States or the mass roundup of right-wing politicians and leaders. He's always called for more voting, not less voting, so he's not on an authoritarian mindset. So when Rand Paul says that he compares this man to Stalin and Pol Pot, it's very disconcerting to me because normally I have a lot of respect for Rand Paul, and he's playing a very, very dirty set of politics right now. I mean, just as easily, Bernie could be comparing his economic policies to that of Augusto Pinochet or Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini, but he doesn't do that because he has a certain amount of decency to recognize that he knows Rand Paul doesn't actually want there to be a financial dictatorship in the most literal sense of the word on behalf of capital. That Rand Paul is a libertarian, although very right-wing libertarian. He's a left libertarian. But the thing is, Bernie Sanders is a libertarian as well, in the sense that he been pushing the Bill of Rights for as long as he's been around, expanding voting rights for people, expanding the recognition of people's religious rights, personal rights, individual rights, etc. And so to brand him as a 20th century style communist dictator ideologue is a bold-faced lie and not fair either to Bernie Sanders himself or, more importantly, to the discourse in our country. Because our country deserves to have people in the mainstream who have different viewpoints. It should be okay that there are politicians who call themselves socialists in our government. And it should be okay that there are politicians that call themselves libertarians in our government. It should be okay that there are politicians that call themselves Greens in our government, or Christian Democrats in our government, or Republicans or Democrats. You know, we should have a much more expanded discourse than we have. And Rand Paul, who is a marginal figure in mainstream politics himself, even though, like I said, I love what he does for civil liberties in our country, Rand Paul should not be marginalizing another person just because they have a different unpopular ideology than Rand Paul has. He should be embracing the level of expansion of the American consciousness that has allowed us to discuss the idea of socialism and libertarianism at the same time without either side saying, let's murder one another. Isn't that nice? Isn't it nice that we have a person running who believes absolutely in states' rights and utter capitalism, unfettered capitalism, at the same time as a democratic socialist, and we're not up in arms, people aren't marching, like fucking killing each other in the streets over it or anything like that? That's a good thing for American democracy, that's occurring. But you see, what Rand Paul is tapping into is a historical relic, essentially, of the 20th century American Cold War versus the Soviet Union, where as the revolutionary communist movements in the West slowed in the 50s and expanded in post-colonial Africa, and the American government began to start these proxy wars by arming people in Korea, in Rhodesia, in Cambodia, Vietnam, Angola, and then the Soviet government would arm counterinsurgencies or revolutionary movements themselves in all these third world nations. And so America and the Soviet Union were playing this giant global game of chess for which stupid fucking system is going to win. Soviet, communist, absolutist dictatorship of state capital, or American, corporatist, anti-leftist, anti-intellectual imperialism. Okay? And both sides began arming these little tiny movements were just letting people in the third world die all the time. And then every now and then there would be a communist dictator that would gain power and turn into a humongous fucking cunt, like Pol Pot, like Stalin, like Mao. And then sometimes, let's be honest, our country is not innocent of this. We would arm capitalist and fascist dictators the world over. Augusto Pinochet killed Salvador Allende in Chile. Salvador Allende was elected government in our CIA of the United States of Imperial America at the fucking time, sent Pinochet in to overthrow the elected leader of a country, and not even 10 years ago, our country was calling for the overthrow of Hugo Chavez, who is also a popular elected socialist. All right? So in the ideological war between communist dictatorship on one side and American capitalist imperialism on the other side, there were a lot of fucking human casualties, all of which are disgusting and all of which are regrettable that they were done in the name of politics when we should be elevating the discourse, explaining to people with passion what we actually believe, and letting real democratic movements, not a democratic party, but real, from the bottom up, democratic movements in the world, which empower people to decide how they want to govern themselves, what political system they want to have, based upon the true will of people, wherever they are. Okay? So when Rand Paul calls Bernie Sanders he says he reminds him of Stalin and Pol Pot, that is extremely intellectually disingenuous, and it is based in an archaic, outside of the norm, historically dead analysis of international politics. And it's not fair that 25 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union and 35 years after the Chinese Communist government embraced capitalism while maintaining political power. There's a weird dialectic. They're called communists, but they force capitalism on everybody. Okay, 35 years after that we can't, in the United States of America, which is a free country, discuss ideas about property, discuss ideas about the management of government openly, and let one another decide democratically what we're going to do about it. That's my key point. He's hearkening back to the Cold War. It's dead. It's over. There's no more Cold War. There's no more fucking... Cuba's opened up. China is funding a third of our country, for Christ's sake. Everything that we buy is made in China. But in fact, there's a problem. The Wall Street owners are in cooperation with the communist Chinese government to oppress the people of China, to oppress the people of America. It doesn't matter. It's not about what the name is, capitalist or socialist. It's about the execution, and it's about what the democratic will of the people themselves is, and it's about bringing up the discourse in the political situation in our country. So I think it's about time that our country embraces a multi-party system, but certainly a multipolar political system that allows for people to have more than a monolithic, or excuse me, a bilithic set of ideas that don't have any intellectual credence in a consistent way anyway, and they're just based upon random, combinations of class values and religious ideology, basically. And move on to a system where people can actually have opinions as divergent or as normal as that they want them to have, and represent them in the public without being told that they're a fucking dictator. Because that is ridiculous. Bernie Sanders is not Stalin or Mao. If you have any doubts, there are still Stalinists and Maoists in the world. Go ask them what they think of Bernie Sanders. They hate him. They think he's way too far to the right. Alright? This is just reality. So I would appreciate it if you would stop accusing people of wanting to seek a totalitarian dictatorship who are obviously not seeking that, just because their economic ideas and their definition of property and the use of a property and the importance of property is different than yours. And they really honestly believe, I honestly believe, with all my heart, that we need to mitigate private property rights in order to protect humanity from ecological disaster and from social ruin through inequality and the inability for the poor to rise up out of their circumstances. That's a real concern, and it's a son of a bitch thing to do, to pretend that that's not a concern. There's nothing we should do about it, that it's intellectually inauthentic, and that everyone that has that opinion is seeking to be a dictator like Stalin or Pol Pot. That is my summation of socialism in modern American politics, with as much history as I could give you. Talking about Rand Paul, talking about Bernie Sanders. I'm Ryan O'Dowd. This is a Black Hand Communique. Tell the banks, go fuck yourself.